Mitch and Joe for inviting me to speak with you today about legal issues. So in the next 10 minutes, I thought I would go through 5 high-level topics and take you through some of the legal issues that can arise. So the first one, public-private healthcare. In the leading newspapers, Globe and Mail, for example, a couple of press releases regarding CAMBI and some litigation that's taking place right now in Vancouver. It's a 4-month trial, likely 200 witnesses, and CAMBI, a private healthcare clinic, is taking a run at the way healthcare works in British Columbia. Why is this going to be a major precedent in Canada? Because he's alleging that Canadians should have the right to choose whether they use the public system or the private system. And if there's any delays, any inability to access the public system, CAMBI says that's contrary to Canada's charter and it should be struck. So what's interesting, back in '62, Tommy Douglas, the forefather of Canadian universal health care, rolled this out in Saskatchewan. We have Canada's Health Act. We've got corresponding provincial legislation. Well, when we look at now, Chaouli, it was a decision actually in Quebec where a Quebec physician and plaintiff actually took a run at the Quebec prohibition on the ability to get private health care in Quebec. And in that case, the court held that indeed the restriction on allowing Quebec residents to access private health care was contrary to the Quebec Charter. So this is going to be closely watched, and the question will be, as the baby boomers age, are they going to have access to private health care? So what do you think? Here's the polling question. Should Canadians have the right to pay privately for public health care, contrary to the forefathers' intent back in '62? Yes, as Trump says, our healthcare system is catastrophic, or we need to maintain Canada's Health Act and the corresponding provincial laws. Very interesting. So as James Corden's band leader says, there's no right answer. This is just a snapshot of what the audience is saying. So on to topic number 2, and that is artificial intelligence. And what do I mean by that? Well, a number of the speakers this morning have spoken about how healthcare has changed. For example, a couple of decades ago, you'll see on the far left, a patient accepted the advice of a physician, off they went for a script, maintained their health care according to the physician's recommendations. Now we've got people taking NHPs, we have the internet, we have Google, and what's to come? Well, of course, we have Watson, who beat the leading players of Jeopardy, and some suggestion that we're going to move to that kind of healthcare. What are the legal issues? Is Watson, for example, diagnosing? Is Watson a medical device? What happens if the physician relies entirely on Watson and carries out the healthcare? Will the insurer step up? So a number of liability, privacy, and various other issues as we change to a world where we rely more and more on artificial intelligence. Third topic, guess who's coming to Canada? Well then, a decade or so ago, large pharma were often looking to set up their Canadian operations. Pretty routine rollout from a legal point of view, maybe some tax issues, employment issues, intercorporate agreements, for example. Now what we're seeing is more and more companies that have succeeded in another market, the United States being the primary one, will roll out their products to Canada. They want to know, can we collect the genetic material and ship it by Canada Post? Can we keep the private information of the patient on a US server? Are there tax issues? Can we do all of this from the United States, or do we need some people on the ground in Canada? Investors, so we have a very robust private and public pension fund system in Canada, and we get lots of ex-Canada investors interested in Canada, Canadian healthcare products, that type of thing. We spoke about this morning about rare diseases. The Canadian government has indicated that they intend to roll out legislation in the next year in draft on rare diseases. So that, along with various other topics, is what's to come. We've heard about pricing. Used to be fairly straightforward, although the PMPRB was unusual. Most people ex-Canada had no idea what it meant and how it worked. Now what's happening is, as we've heard this morning, many layers of pricing bodies involved, with the PMPRB trying to get more of a leadership role on pricing. And just yesterday, PMPRB put out its first market intelligence report on DMARDs, commenting on pricing, how Canada fares, so they're clearly trying to play a leadership role. Moving to a polling question, what do you think? Are we going to move to a single payer system where we have a single purchaser of publicly funded drugs in the coming years? So you have a polling question, either yes, this is going to happen, or no, we're going to continue to have negotiations with multiple payers. Very interesting. So we'll wait to see when we can revisit this in the next Congress to see if this proves to be the case in the coming years. Last topic, who's doing what? Well, it used to be very straightforward, at least in the law world. Were you a law firm for generics? Were you a law firm for innovators? And there'd be questions on how to get the drug approved, how to get it paid for, fairly straightforward. Well, now we're having a blurring of the lines where some generics are getting into the biosimilar space, some innovators are getting into the biosimilar space. From a legal point of view, it can relate to issues of contracts. What did we say in our contracts 10 years ago? Did we say we'd always be an innovator? Is this inconsistent with what we've told investors, various others in contracts? Are there privacy issues when we gathered information and used data? Did we indicate we were using it for a particular purpose? There can be Competition Act issues. You know, if we're rolling our products into a new space, are we compliant with various laws? So these are just a few of the complexities that can arise as the supply chain changes. And it is changing. People, like for example, yesterday, Shoppers Drug Mart is getting into the medical marijuana business. And so the supply chain, historically, who used to do what, we cannot assume that that will continue to be the case. And the market, I think, will continue to shake up. So that's my presentation. Thank you for today. I'd like to thank Yusun Gadson Chung, one of my colleagues who kindly helped me put this together. I have materials if anyone would like a copy of anything.